Do you ever wonder, at the end of the day, you get to the end of the year even, you feel like you're working more than you did last year. Where's the money? Why does it feel so arduous yet there's not a lot to show for it? That's our conversation today on the podcast. Let's dive in. Well, welcome to Business Growth Blueprint. I'm your host, BJ O'Neill, where we talk all things profitability, leadership, and culture, specifically for faith-driven entrepreneurs and business owners. So there is a guy who is an online coach who the last 4 or 5 years has been helping through courses and through trainings to learn how to advertise. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all the TikTok, all the different ways. And he has a great story to where he had an idea, he had a dream, and it kind of worked. And he started to build the business. They were doing courses, they were doing webinars, they were doing all these different things. It's a pretty cool story, actually. And he began to grow. And that's exactly what we want, right? So as business owners, that's our desire. We either start a business, we buy a business, whatever. Sometimes the business just takes off and it's like, wow, this feels effortless. Other times it feels very arduous. And so as he began to grow the business, it got bigger. It was 6 figures, then 7 figures, then 8 figures, and so on. As the more money, more team members. There was 10, then there was 20, then there was 40, then there was 50. And then came the big office, the really big office in downtown in his city, where they leased a lot of space for the team. And then he didn't just have local teams, he had teams all over the country and VAs all over the world. And the business got really, really big. Yet, as he tells it, the story, he couldn't lay his head on the pillow at night and rest. He didn't have a lot of peace. Why? Revenues were going up every year, but profitability really wasn't there. It simply kind of was elusive to some degree, it felt like. And he fell into the trap that we call the revenue trap. What is that? It's when we are overly focused on the money coming into the bucket, in other words, the revenue from the bucket, and we're not focused on how do we keep as much as possible of what's coming in. And this is where growth happens, where we end up focusing so much on grow, get big, but we're not pushing ourselves or strategically getting advised to sustain. This is why. In 5 years, according to the SBA and other research organizations, 90% of businesses don't make it. Why? They've spent so much time trying to just earn the money that they forget to keep some of the money. They forget to take some of the money and repurpose it and put it back into invest into the business for sustainability. And we do even what I did in my early years, where expansion, spending more money. And so what's the issue? Well, number one, revenue by itself is vanity. Now, we have to have revenue, clearly. However, we have to understand, as a faith-driven entrepreneur and business owner, profit is stewardship. So when we begin to shift the camera angle, if you will, and we begin to recognize, if I really am going to steward what God's given me, I need to have a plan. I need to have focused intention and effort on profitability before it is about revenue. Many of us, as business owners, we chase top-line revenue to a point. Why? Because it feels like progress. And so if you go year to year, which again, at the end of every year, we start to examine, what we did this past year, what do we want to do next year, and so on. So if the business did 5 million, how do we go to 7? And it feels, we did it, we got it. Let's go to 8, let's go to 9, except for no one's really paying attention to the bottom line. It's exciting, especially, I'll tell you, there's 2 big turns that happen. It's just normal, we're human. But when a business is either started or they're newer or whatever, and they're growing, especially in the service-based sector, roofing, plumbing, HVAC, and so on. And we've been growing the business, especially if we started out solo by ourselves. We get the business to 400,000 a year, 500,000 a year. We're at 800,000 a year. Oh my gosh, we're at 900,000. We're about to crack 7 figures, $1 million. It does feel good. Same thing happens at 10 million. We've done 8 million. We've done 9 million. We've done 990,000. What, December? Let's do it. What do we got to do? Get 10 million. But that's what causes this whole kind of collapse, if you will, if we're not careful, that we're not focused on stewarding and keeping as much as we can to invest to make an impact. Proverbs 27, I get my words out, 27:23 says, "Be sure you know the conditions of your flock and give careful attention to your herds." What's the point? In synopsis, we have to take care of the things that matter the most. And in business, revenue clearly matters. But if you're not profitable, you run risk of not being around. And I've seen over and over, probably you have too, maybe unfortunately you experienced it, to where the business it feels like it's going well. We're growing. It's going. Year 1, 2, 3, awesome. And then all of a sudden, like we lose a really key team member, or a new competitor shows up, or something happens in the marketplace. Maybe, we had a loan and the whoever owns the loan got bought out by somebody else and they just made life hard, right? Like I've seen it. You probably have too. And it's like, what happened? Things were going so well. It's because we're not putting ourselves in a position of stewardship to sustain. A couple of years ago, one of our coaches on our team was working with a business, and towards the end of the year, they were moving into a record year. Record year, I think $40 million was the number. High fives. They were going to do a celebration, this massive Christmas party, which they did. High fives, woohoo, horns blowing. There's nothing wrong with that, except the year turns. January comes. Meetings with CPAs, financial advisors, and so on. Well, they got so focused on the record year, vanity. They got so focused on the top line numbers, fictitious. They got so focused on the word growth that no one truly was 40 million. No one was truly paying attention to stewardship. And what happened in February? Layoffs. They were starting to bail the water out of the bucket faster than they wanted to because they had no choice. And that's what happens when we put ourselves on the wall. We have to make really difficult decisions that hurts other people because our focus was simply off. Growing revenue without profit is like adding more water to the bucket that's full of holes. Stewardship simply means we're plugging the holes first. Number 2, profit growth comes from precision, not expansion. In our story earlier of my friend who had the online business, is that he was so focused, like all of us do in business, on just grow, get big, expand, that he wasn't looking at precision. Now, absolutely, you can grow like that as long as you're maintaining healthy profitability. And while it's going to shift from industry to industry, again, I say on this podcast very often, the average in America of net profit is around 10% or so. But, you want to get healthy, get into 20 to 30% number and beyond. Now you're talking. And so when you get in that 20 to 30% range, again, industries will shift a little bit. Now, if you expand, great. But when we're expanding and we're like at 2%, or we're barely breaking even, or worse, we're underwater, that people do it every single day, okay? And so most businesses, they think that growth means more customers, more locations, more products. However, profit growth often comes from better systems, tighter margins, and a clear or more clear offer. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't need more customers. It doesn't mean that we don't need an additional location. It doesn't mean that we don't need more products. But when we put what my grandfather would say, the cart before the horse, then we run risk of sustainability. That's the reason why when we have more of a stewardship mindset, which is a profitable thinking first, before we get into more, which that's the expansion, that's more customers. When we say more customers, it's like, well, what's wrong with having more customers? We're talking about more advertising and marketing spend before we've plugged the holes for more increased and improved profitability. Okay, super, super important. Third, clarity creates capacity. See, when you're not clear on your numbers, there's 3 numbers that matter most in a business. We'll do an episode that gets into the weeds of all that. But we're talking about our top line revenues, our gross margins, and our nets. That's the 3 that matters the most. When you don't have clarity, we can't have capacity. When you focus on profitable growth, you gain clarity on what actually moves the needle. Now, here's what's interesting. Most of us think for any kind of growth and trajectory, we got to have more. Now, I'll tell you, I suffer from the same issue. Part of that has to do with what we call for entrepreneurs is the shiny object syndrome. It's real. And I'm one of the worst, where I'm talking about the ability to go, I see an idea, or especially with what we do, we're talking with a lot of businesses all the time. So we get access and purview to things that they're doing. And when you see that, and you're going, oh, I could do that over here. I could do that over there. And all of a sudden, we've got goals, we've created a plan, all these different things, but all of a sudden we made a detrimental decision to create more without verifying that it actually connects back to the core purpose of what the business is supposed to do. And so, when we find out what actually moves the needle, which usually is actually a lot less than what we think that it is. You're probably familiar with GoPro. GoPro, man, what a company. At one point, had a massive, I don't remember what it was, 2, 3, 4 billion. I might be wrong about that, but it's in the billions. That part I know for a fact. They were at the top of their game. And largely at the time, call it 2014, 15, they didn't really have any competitors. And I'll tell you, when you're in that season, and I've seen it time and time again, especially if you don't have a lot of competitive influences, it's really easy to take your eye off the ball. Well, as smartphones got better, as consumers changed their habits, they started falling into the trap of the word more. Well, we should add more products, more of this, more of that, and they did. And they got away from their initial core purpose. They created culture. They created an entire movement. Surfers, skateboarders, bikers, racers, you name it. I mean, literally, they created an entire movement that didn't exist prior. But because they didn't actually stick to their core initiative that they started with, and they just started creating more products that they didn't verify what they were for. Did they even need them? The answer was no, by the way. They lost 98% of their market cap because they just got away from the things that mattered the most by adding a lot of more that did not matter. Clarity, however, and when you're looking at the business strategically, and as people of faith, when we're asking for God to show us with clarity to make a decision, when we have better clarity, it simplifies our decision-making process. That helps you to delegate better, make a decision on what to start, what to stop, what to continue, and certainly prevents burnout. I've worked with a lot of business owners who suffer from burnout, and they're suffering from burnout because the business is doing too much. Now, I'm not really talking about the Fortune 500 world, certainly the Apples and the Amazons and all that. That's a different conversation because they've got bandwidth, because they've got the size of team and departments and whatnot. Although they run risk too. Any business does. But when we'll call it sub 100 million in annual revenue. And by the way, 97% of businesses at the small and medium level are at 2 million and less. Okay, so the vast majority are around that number. If you're above that number, you're at 5 and 10 million, you're well above average. Good on you. That's awesome. Okay? But when we're around that 2 million, we still think We just got to do all this other extra stuff. But when we have clear signals and clarity, discernmentship, and we're asking God to kind of show us what matters the most, you'll find there's only typically a few things that's actually moving the needle. This is the reason why some of the chains like In-N-Out Burgers, Raising Cane's, they have a very simplified menu because they figured it out. They don't want complication. And if chicken for Raising Cane's, by the way, they're valued at over $1 billion. One individual from Louisiana who had an idea, who sold it literally nearly out of his car, created a business worth $1 billion. You want to know why? Simplicity. He didn't fall into the trap of just looking for more growth for revenue's sake without it being simple. Faith-driven owners often overcommit because we feel called to the word more. And I know that's kind of weird because we feel like growth is more, but it happens all the time. I see it. But clarity actually brings peace. So if you are suffering right now to where you lay your head on the pillow at night and you're struggling to find peace in the business, that is a signal that you got some work to do in understanding strategically upon actually what's making the business move and figuring out, do I need to get rid of stuff? Do we have products or services that really don't matter? You may remember, if you've seen it before, I don't know if it's in production anymore, but the show with Marcus Lemonis called The Prophet. And what he would do with these businesses that were struggling, especially retail, even restaurants though. With retail, he would go in, they would take SKUs off the rack and move things that really were making movement to the front so that people could see them and get to them a lot easier. Restaurants, same thing, oftentimes, and I'm talking about especially mom and pop style, local community restaurants, where they would have just a slammed menu. And what that means is we're keeping product in the back that goes bad and spoils because no one's really buying that. And that's money. And so he would go in and just cut things, and sometimes the owners were like, what are you doing? But he understood. That's why outside voices, by the way, is help. He understood that more is not always the best. We want clarity on what actually moves the needle. Last one. Profit, which is stewardship, fuels purpose. When your business is profitable, you have margin. Financially, see, we're not talking about just money. Financially, emotionally, and spiritually. That's what margin really means. When you're profitable, you typically are going to be at more peace. You're more available to your family. You're more available to your friends, your neighbors, your team members, and so on. When the business is broke, it's a wreck. Been there. You get sleepless nights. And I can tell you, just doing the same thing over and over and expecting it to change is not a business plan. We want to get in there and do something about it. Margin allows you to give generously, serve others without strain. And here's a cool one. To invest into people and projects that align with your purpose. I've seen it time and time again. Great business leaders who get an opportunity to hire a really skilled individual that can help the business and help the individual, yet the business wasn't profitable enough to pay them what they were actually worth, and they lost them to a competitor. Happens all the time. In God's economy, as far as I'm concerned, profit is not greed. I know people of faith, sometimes we struggle about the whole money thing, but profit is not greed. It's actually provision. And it enables you to sustain and to be generous. Some of this you may have to wrestle with, right? Because you may feel like, golly, we've just talked about all the time. We focus on revenue, and you're, maybe the hair's kind of standing up on the back of your neck right now because it's kind of either making you uneasy or it's given you some light bulb moments. Maybe you have had an aha moment. I hope you have. I hope you get enough value from Business Growth Blueprint that it does that very thing. But here's what I know. Information is useless without action. So you need to make a decision. What do you need to make action on today? based upon not getting in the middle of the revenue trap. Hope that adds value to you. Until next time, take care. In our next episode together, we're going to talk about why faith-driven leaders can't afford to neglect communication.